On the 7th day, the survivors held a vote. 27 people remained on the raft. 12 were too weak to survive, so the others seized them one by one and threw them into the sea. Not for food, they had plenty of corpses for that. They killed them for the wine. By then, the deck was slick with blood. They'd been eating the dead for days. Bodies lay in piles, butchered in the sun, swarming with flies. 15 would survive, 135 would not, but they weren't shipwrecked, they were abandoned. One man put them on that raft, and when it became a burden, he cut the ropes and rowed away. His name was Hugues de Roy de Shipwreck, a captain who hadn't commanded a ship in 20 years. On July 2nd, 1816, he ran the French frigate Medusa onto a reef 30 miles off the coast of Senegal. 400 people, 6 lifeboats, and a makeshift raft that was never meant to carry anyone. The officers and aristocrats took the boats. Everyone else, 150 soldiers, sailors, and one woman, were told to board the hastily built raft. By the time the last one climbed on, they were standing waist deep in the ocean, the salt stinging their skin, the raft groaning under their weight. The plan was for the lifeboats to tow them 30 miles to shore, but within hours the men in the lifeboats were exhausted. The raft was too heavy. If it sank, all those desperate people would swarm the lifeboats. Shipwreck didn't hesitate. One by one, the lifelines between the boat and the raft were severed, each snap a death sentence for the people on the raft. A captain is supposed to be the last man off his ship. Shipwreck was in the first boat. As they rowed away, he sat with his back to the raft. He never turned around, not once. The people on the raft watched in confusion as the boats grew smaller and smaller. Confusion turned to panic. Men screamed curses at the lifeboats and begged them to return, but the distance only grew. Some leapt into the waves and tried to swim after them, only to vanish within seconds, swallowed by an indifferent sea. 150 people with almost no food and a single barrel of wine, 30 miles from shore. They'd been left to die. As night fell, another storm rolled in. Waves swept across the deck, dragging men into the ropes and under the black water. People clung together and prayed. By dawn, 25 were dead. The survivors told themselves they would be rescued. The lifeboats must have reached the shore by now, but help didn't come. The second night adrift on the raft was worse. By now, the survivors had determined that the centre of the raft was the only safe place. It was higher, more stable, further from the waves. But there wasn't room for everyone. The naval officers claimed the centre. The infantry soldiers refused to yield. Shoving quickly turned into punching, and a full-scale battle erupted in the darkness, men slashing blind, screaming, stumbling over bodies. Men were thrown overboard, others were beaten until they stopped moving. When the sun finally rose, bodies lay tangled in the ropes, slick with blood, rolling with each swell. But the killing wasn't over. Some soldiers broke into the wine barrel. Drunk and despairing, they grabbed axes and started hacking at the ropes holding the raft together, attacking anyone who tried to stop them. The passengers, civilians caught between the factions, watched in horror as the raft tore itself apart. By the end of the third day, only 67 people were still alive, and they were starving. The survivors attempted to fish, bending their belt buckles into hooks. They caught nothing. Others chewed on leather straps, linen shirts, even the corks from empty bottles. It wasn't enough. In most survival stories, cannibalism comes after weeks of starvation. On the raft of the Medusa, it took 3 days. The bodies of the dead lay on the raft, bloated and pale in the sun, flies crawling over their face. One by one, the survivors began to cut. At first, they dried the flesh in the sun to make it easier to stomach. Later, they stopped bothering. In the words of one survivor, those whom death had spared fell upon the dead bodies and cut off pieces, which some instantly devoured. On the 4th day, a small miracle occurred. A school of flying fish passed over the raft, dozens landed on the deck and were scooped up by desperate hands. They made a fire inside an empty barrel and cooked what they'd caught, but there wasn't enough fish to go around, so they mixed the fish with human flesh. The wine was now strictly rationed. 2 soldiers were caught boring a hole in the barrel, stealing extra for themselves. They were executed immediately and thrown overboard. On the raft of the Medusa, stealing wine was a crime worse than eating the dead. On the 7th day, the officers gathered in the centre of the raft. They looked at the 27 people still alive and performed a cold calculation. 15 were strong enough to survive if rescue came soon. The other 12 were wounded, delirious, or dying. They wouldn't last more than a few days, but they were still drinking the wine. If they kept rationing it to all 27, everyone would be dead in days. Without them, the wine might last another week, long enough perhaps for a ship to find them. There was a debate. Some argued for mercy, let the weak die in peace. Others argued there was no time. The weak might drink more wine in their final hours. They might attract sharks with their bleeding wounds. A decision was made, and the 12 were seized and dragged to the edge of the raft. Some were too weak to resist. Others fought screaming, clawing at the men who grabbed them. It made no difference. They were thrown into the sea. Among them was the only woman left on the raft. She had survived the storm, the battle, the starvation. She had been thrown overboard once before and dragged back to safety. But this time, no one saved her. In the space of an hour, the survivors had murdered 12 of their own. They told themselves it was necessary, that it was survival, but they had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. For 6 long days, the survivors drifted. They huddled under a makeshift tent, hiding from the sun that blistered their skin. They ate what flesh remained. They rationed the last of the wine by the sorry mouthful. On the morning of the 13th day, a sailor crawled out of the tent and saw a sail. A ship, the Argus, one of the convoy that had left them behind, was heading straight for them. The survivors crawled from the tent, weeping, waving their hands, clutching each other, delirious in their joy. When the Argus pulled alongside, the sailors on deck recoiled from the stench of rotting flesh and stared in horror at what remained. 15 skeletal figures on a blood-stained raft surrounded by human bones. All 15 were brought aboard. 5 died within weeks, their bodies too broken to recover. Captain Shipwreck made it safely to Senegal. He was court-martialed and found guilty of negligence. He was sentenced to just 3 years in a comfortable cell. Then he walked free, returned to his estate, and lived another 30 years. He died in his bed at 86, half a century after abandoning 150 people to die. He never apologised, he never faced the families, he never once spoke of the raft. 150 people boarded that raft, 15 were rescued, and the man who cut the ropes, he outlived them all. This has been the dark story of the raft of the Medusa. I just want to say thanks for watching, guys. If you enjoyed this video, consider checking out one of my others linked here. I'll see you next time.